Ambassador Rasool is the former South African ambassador to the United States and former governor of Western Cape. He served as a member of parliament in South Africa's National Assembly and special advisor to the state president, and has had extensive experience in public service in various departments. He has a long history of involvement in the anti-apartheid struggle, including leadership in the United Democratic Front and the African National Congress. He is the founder of the World for All Foundation, which aims to rethink the intellectual tools available to Muslims and faith communities. You have worked with two of the world's most iconic leaders, Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu. What kind of lessons can we learn from their leadership?
You know, Bertolt Brecht, in his play Galileo, uses a memorable phrase where he says, "Unhappy is the land that needs a hero." Because heroism, the need to rise to the occasion, often occurs when a country or a society is deeply unhappy. I've had the privilege of working with 3 of the 4 Nobel Peace Prize winners in South Africa, Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, and F.W. de Klerk. All of them put together a texture of leadership that spoke to the deep unhappiness of apartheid South Africa. And therefore, when you are in an unhappy situation, it is not a call for despair. It is a call for heroism. And so we should be so privileged that when confronted with deep unhappiness like Nelson Mandela was, you joyfully go to prison for 27 years. And so it's not the populism
Right.
that we see parading around the world, the mainstream extremism, as I call it. But what you see is popular politics, in which you take unpopular position and you persuade communities about its rightness and then get them to act in concert with it. And that's the privilege that I've had to work with all 3, those kind of leaders in a project, and that ultimately triumphed. And to understand what made each one of them so successful in becoming the hero that we require in the world today. Our challenges are different. Today, our enemies don't walk around in uniform. They are insidious. Our enemies don't drive Caspers and armored vehicles. They aim at our minds with fake news and seductive siren songs. Our enemies don't, for example, jail us, but they poison our mind with a toxicity of fear and anger that make us rally behind them. And therefore, I think that the enduring lessons, while each one of those 3 heroes that I worked with were time-bound, their lessons are eternal in time, universal in space, and adaptable to circumstance. And that really is, don't look to imitate Nelson Mandela, look to emulate him. And emulation is the act of finding that finest values that they worked with and that you can transpose in different circumstances. And so, for example, just one last thing, they were all governed by one bit of African philosophy called Ubuntu. I am because you are. It is the recognition of the humanity in the other.
You know, you talked about populism versus popular, right? And how's that played into your own leadership style?
You know, another African saying that we have is one that says, your anger is hot, but it cannot cook. We see so much of what activism is premised on, and to borrow from Al Gore, that sends us down rabbit holes, is the belief that anger is legitimate. In South Africa, the struggle is to direct your anger, to give it a purpose and to make it cook. And if you have the anger that you speak with this righteousness, that you label with abandon, that you condemn even your enemies to death, it's all an expression of real problems that you're having, real grievances that we're having, but it does not cook. It does not take you from the devastation where you are to the promise where you want to be. And so the counter-instinctive is how to manage your anger. And that's why Nelson Mandela could come out of prison. Anger is an imprisonment. And that's counter-instinctive, to overcome your anger and to move forward in the same way that popular is counter-instinctive to populist. It is better to speak into the anger of people and direct that anger at whoever you want to direct it at. And then lastly, that counter-instinctive is that we learn from Mozambique, Angola, Rhodesia, all of those colonial states around us, that their colonialists had somewhere else to go. The Portuguese to Portugal, the Brits to, etc., etc. Our colonialists had nowhere else to go.
They had to stay.
They were going to stay. We had to face them the day after liberation. How do you want to face them? With perpetual anger or with coexistence? And if you choose coexistence, you choose reconciliation. And if you choose reconciliation, you make the rules that will make reconciliation sustainable and equitable into the future.
How do you practice that each and every day?
By always pushing to the front of your mind what often wants to go to the back of your mind, and that is your purpose. It is about purposeful leadership. Sometimes each one of us has to find that purpose that is so worthwhile to die for, that we now know what to live for.
How you've been in the work for so long? What keeps you in it? How do you keep the fight going?
The pleasure is in the anticipation. It's not always in the achievement. And more importantly, to stay in touch with your own humanity. And so you've got to plan for joy in your life. You've got to plan for your regeneration. In life, you first do what you must do so that later you can do what you want to do. And that's a lesson that I learned very early in life. Never to take ourselves too seriously. We are busy with serious stuff.
Yes.
But you are a cog in a bigger picture. Yes. Don't take yourself so seriously that you believe this organization will fall if I'm not there. The organization will go on.
When you are focusing on these really hard issues, how do you maintain that passion and take care of the people working for you as well?
It's the balance between making everyone feel absolutely valuable, but at the same time, not making them think that the organization exists for them. We exist for the broader impact in society. If you don't keep that balance, you can have a club rather than an organization. We are so busy helping each other that we are wellness for ourselves and not for society.
What questions are you asking yourself right now where you are?
You would all know that I've spoken about the great history of South Africa, but we have a very bad present. The question that I ask myself is, what do people like myself do to salvage the legacy of noble people against the venality of those who trade off the organization and the legacy of Nelson Mandela to do dastardly things to society? And so my question is, how much energy do I have for that fight?
What is a leadership moment that really challenged your heart? And can you walk us through that?
You might want to go before the ambassador. It's on this side. Lesson learned. Just saying. We'll start on this side. Ambassador, you have to wait till your turn. Yeah, see it? I tried, y'all. I tried.
Any struggle is an adventure until the crunch comes. And we all need to face our crunches. There's got to be a moment that you need to face your demons, combat your demons, and discipline your soul for struggle. Otherwise, it's ego.
Yes.
And how do you get the ego out of the room and really face this battle-hardened soul now of yours that is purposeful and sincere and filled with integrity of good purpose? But there's a moment at which struggle is sacrifice rather than adventure. And you've got to reach that moment when you are making the trade-off about how much time you spend with your own children and how do you balance the needs of your own child with the needs of other people's children who are not fortunate enough. And we so often justify ourselves. Our answers come before the question is even finished. You've almost got to renew your purpose and to see that these are things that happened before and things that will happen afterwards. You are one part of the relay race of life.
Right.
I'd love to hear some of your strategies or tips or experiences on how to really encourage and develop next generation of leaders from really, really marginalized communities.
If you make the decision to be inclusive, you've got to not make the appointment change, You've got to make the institutional and
Right.
cultural change.
Right.
Otherwise, you will lose the person after a year.
Right.
But you've also got to manage and calculate the pain to yourself. So when I was in health and welfare, I come from a very conservative Muslim community that had no time for LGBTQI+ and so forth. But I needed people that I appointed to understand that I am doing this with some cost, and therefore there's a commitment that we have to each other beyond the appointment, that I'm ensuring that when we have people with disabilities, that we are going to make the structural shifts and not have toilets that we've got to improvise. It's got to be institutional.
Right.
It's got to be a worthy, not conflict-free, because you invite them into a conflict zone because they've been excluded, because people have not known them, therefore have not understood them, therefore have not loved them, and therefore have not embraced them. And for you to get going along that whole continuum, you've got to start with putting the person into the face to be known,
Yes.
and then into the space to be understood, and then into the atmosphere in which to be loved and appreciated,
Yes.
and then into the atmosphere where the embrace follows naturally. If you can't do all of that,
Right.
you are tokenizing.
Right.